Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we get you set for tonight's matchup in Atlanta against a Hawks team that picked up a big win last night. We take a look at the latest news surrounding Ryan Rollins and start to take a peek ahead to playoff seeding. We get into all of that coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for continuing to check out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not done so yet, you can still sign up for free at lockedondaily.com and get your day started with the all-new and free Locked On Bucks newsletter. A couple of news piece. There's actually one big piece of news to get started with here, Camille. And as we mentioned, the game against the Hawks later tonight, a little more clarity on the injury report for that one. But the big news, which came Monday afternoon, is one of the things we've been talking about and speculating for the last couple of weeks. Ryan Rollins has been upgraded to a standard contract. That's the good news. I don't even want to say the bad news. Just the caveat is it's just for the duration of the season. So it's not one of these multi-year deals that we've seen more and more guys signing here of late. The reason you're seeing this influx is we have now, as you listen to this, hit the deadline to add any two-way players. So just for the rest of the season for Ryan Rollins, which means he will be a restricted free agent this summer. What are your thoughts on that?
I was a little surprised that it was only through the end of this season, but to your point, with them doing it this way, they still have some level of control over what can happen in the future with Ryan Rollins and the Milwaukee Bucks, given that he would be a restricted free agent if the Bucks issue out that qualifying offer. So they have that in their bag. But I mean, it's been kind of weird around the whole situation because we've been wondering for a while, like, hey, when is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? Like we saw Ryan Rollins start handful of games so far this season. We knew he was getting closer and closer to that 50-game max that he has as an active player on an NBA roster, which he hit against the Nuggets. So it was just kind of like, when is this going to happen? And it finally did. Really surprised it's just to the end of the season, but maybe the Bucks are just trying to, cover bases. They enjoy the rotation that they kind of have right now. And Ryan Rollins isn't really figured to be a big part of that, but it's nice to have a younger player under contract, especially with the new CBA. And we've seen the potential with Rollins.
We have seen potential. I don't even think this is the reason why. The one thing that if you kind of look around and see, well, maybe they're doing it because of this, everybody's other favorite player suddenly in Kevin Porter Jr. You've had him and his emergence now in this rotation. He's moved past Ryan Rollins and taken the role that everybody had kind of carved out for Ryan Rollins. Kevin Porter Jr. has a player option this summer too. So on the one hand, you could look at it and you say, well, the need for Ryan Rollins is not quite as severe as it was before, certainly before the trade deadline, not even taking Kevin Porter Jr. into account, just the Bucks' overall financial state of affairs and where they were with their cap space, the lack of young players on the roster. But look, there's also no harm in keeping in place as many young and very team-friendly contracts as you can.
Need those. The top of this roster is really heavy when it comes to the salary, what you're paying Giannis and what Dame is getting paid, especially with the extension kicking in for Giannis. So it's a lot of money tied up in your top two players there. So being able to have younger guys on contract that are going to be small cap figures is going to be really helpful. And I love that you brought up that Kevin Porter Jr. has a player option this upcoming offseason, because it's going to be interesting to see what he does as well, if he opts into that player option or if he's going to be looking for a little bit more security going forward and if Milwaukee's going to be that place. So knowing that he has the player option and seeing that they only gave Rollins, this fully guaranteed NBA contract through the end of the year makes me feel like they're kind of keeping options open depending on how things swing out. Not saying that's the only roster move that they're going to have to consider this offseason, but it gives you a little bit of like, hey, it's a backup. If we want to move on, get somebody different, move someone else in, we have that option, or we can try to regain one or two of these guys here.
So Ryan Rollins, in trying to briefly breeze through this is more of a van area, the CBA for this qualifying offer, um, he doesn't fall into the camp of players who finished year number 2 of a two-way contract or were on a third consecutive two-way contract and then upgraded. I don't believe he's in there because of the spot where he's being upgraded on the calendar. So that, in theory, would make him eligible for the 135% increase on that qualifying deal. So you're talking about, if that is the case, what, close to a $5 million qualifying offer that you're extending to Ryan Rollins in order to have those rights for him as a restricted free agent. Again, if Kevin Porter Jr. shows what he's, I think, largely shown, I don't know that, that we're there yet. But the playoffs, especially if Kevin Porter Jr. has a big playoffs, there's much more of a market out there for him. And even I think what he's started to show in limited spurts, I do wonder how intriguing he's going to be to other teams to say, hey, are you willing to come here and fill that same role as the guy that runs our second offense and gives us some defense? So the Bucks, again, are in a much better spot with their cap, and we certainly feel much better about the younger players and the athleticism and versatility that they have. But all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, I mean, that could be gone in this summer, at least in the case of those two players.
It could be. It could be. And for Rollins, just taking a second to just say congratulations to him for getting that fully guaranteed NBA contract, even though it's only for the rest of the season. Like, he's had a little bit of a rocky journey to the start of his NBA career as well. Ending up in Washington after it was the trade from Golden State initially. And then, he had the incident led to his release with the Wizards, ended up in Milwaukee here on the two-way contract. And we've heard Rollins himself say, like, I feel like I've earned an NBA contract this season. I feel like I've played worthy enough to get an NBA contract. And he was able to do that. Like, the journey isn't over. There is still a lot more security that I know he's going to be after, and a lot more to prove for him along the road of his NBA career. But it's something that we had been expecting. But again, the addition of Kevin Porter Jr. and what happened at the trade deadline shook things up a little bit for the roster. But I do think that keeping Rollins around is still a good idea for this team from what we discussed. And two, just he's flashed some really intriguing potential too, with his ability to play defense at a very high level. The shot's been a little bit inconsistent when he's gotten a little bit more playing time, and the understanding that he's a combo guard who's been trying to play a lot of point guard. So just kind of seeing how he continues to develop with it being in a Milwaukee Bucks jersey for now, I think is a good thing for the team.
Yeah, he's certainly earned it. And, you think back to what he's shown in brief flashes when he had to step in as a starter. Mm-hmm. And again, it goes back to what we talked about earlier too, in that I don't think Ryan Rollins has changed or hit a wall per se. It just has more to do with the players around him now, that all of a sudden some of the things that he was able to provide another player too, that we're really seeing it with an Andre Jackson Jr. Mm-hmm. He didn't get any less athletic, right? It's just, hey, we've upgraded it around you. And that's the same story for Ryan Rollins. But as we said at the top, I mean, you can never have enough of these players. Exactly. So that's the other thing this alleviates too, is we've seen Damian Lillard on injury reports and the whole, well, what if something happens here where Dame goes down for a couple of games, maybe even Kevin Porter Jr., and then all of a sudden, what do you do until Ryan Rollins gets converted because he's ineligible, having used up all 50 of those two-way days as a member of the Bucks? So congrats to Ryan Rollins. Good news for the Bucks depth as well, and a big opportunity for Ryan Rollins as well. We'll be curious to see what happens with his restricted free agency now coming up over this summer. We mentioned there's a little bit of clarity on the injury report for the Bucks. It's not the greatest in terms of some of the updates that we've seen to it. We'll take a look at that, and a look at the opponent too, who had a very, very interesting night and closed to the game Monday night in the Atlanta Hawks. So we'll get to that conversation coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you now about DoorDash. All of us NBA fans, it's time to get ready for that swoosh. When they swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player scores 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It is very simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 2024-25 regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to $10 savings the next day from noon to midnight. Several great ways to take advantage of this deal, whether you're planning an epic game day feast after a big 50-point performance. You can celebrate by ordering wings, pizza, or burgers from your favorite spot and get it delivered straight to your door. Maybe you need lunch on the go the next day. You need that quick, easy lunch. With Dash Pass, you get your favorite meals with $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus, now you save even more with this NBA exclusive offer. Or if you're just planning a big watch party to catch the next game, order your go-to snacks and meals at a discount and get ready for more high-scoring action. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save when any player scores 50 or more in a game. Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. You must be an active Dash Pass member and have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. To learn more, head to DoorDash.com. And look, you want to get in on that offer right now because we had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander drop 51 points last night for the Oklahoma City Thunder. So go ahead and use that offer. Use the code NBA50 on your Dash Pass account to get those great savings. All right, Camille, we mentioned last night Shai Gilgeous-Alexander with another 50-point game as the Thunder knock off the Houston Rockets. But the Bucks' opponent tonight was also in action last night. They were in Memphis taking on the Grizzlies. And to say that was an interesting finish to the game is putting it very mildly. The Memphis Grizzlies dropped to the Atlanta Hawks. They've now lost 3 straight games. And, this Hawks team is still kind of circling the drain in the Eastern Conference play-in tournament, though they're in no real danger of being flushed because of what's happening with Philadelphia and the Brooklyn Nets still there as well. But they have that personnel. I think when you watch this game, and we've seen the Hawks a couple of times this season already, but when you watch that game against the Memphis Grizzlies, it's just a reminder that, regardless of what the record is, the Atlanta Hawks are just not a fun team to play.
They're not fun at all unless you're a Hawks fan because they don't have any quit in them. Like they've had, I believe this might be game 10 or 11.
Yeah.
Like double-digit deficits that they've overcome for victory. So even if you're up big on the Hawks, like it doesn't mean much because they're not going to quit. They don't have any quit in them. And even in that game against the Grizzlies last night, the Grizzlies opened that fourth quarter up and they were up by like 13 points. The Hawks got that down to 3 with like 3 minutes left. And then they went on a Dyson Daniels steal and LeVert like layup to end the game. Like no quit in this team, even when they're missing key pieces. I didn't know how they would continue to respond when Jalen Johnson went out for the season, but they continue to find ways to win, and they play so fast. They play so fast. I believe they're top 2 in the league in pace. So you got to get ready to run. I think the thing I'm hoping for on the Bucks end is like, hey, maybe this is an emotional high type of win for the Hawks. And, they come into the game against the Bucks a little bit deflated after a crazy win over the Grizzlies.
Yeah, one of the best finishes to a game all season. Like we all love buzzer beaters, but the way that happened, that it's not just a catch and shoot 3 or an off the bounce 3 at the horn. Like Dyson Daniels strips Desmond Bane with 3 seconds left, heaves it down the court, and you get the lay-in from Karis LeVert at the buzzer to win it. So an incredible finish to the game for the Atlanta Hawks. And now they return home. So it's night 2 of a back-to-back for Atlanta, though. I really hate pointing out back-to-backs when we're talking about young teams because it just doesn't seem to impact them the same way. I mentioned there's some updates on the Bucks injury report. It's not the greatest. Obviously, Bobby Portis is still out. This is game 6 of that 25-game suspension. The newly signed Pete Nance, we've still yet to see in action. I think this is the 3rd game he will have been active for the Bucks or on the rostered for the Bucks and inactive now with a left ankle sprain. Pat Connaughton is still out with a left calf strain. Kyle Kuzma was the update. He is listed as doubtful, which at this stage in the game, you take to mean he is not going to play. And that is kind of one of the underlying, that's not great because now it's back to the point of, I know you have Jericho Sims, but it's pretty much just Giannis and Brook Lopez. When you think about Kuz and the spot that he had kind of filled, the way you're able to use Jericho Sims too is basically just your 5. Because like that's the biggest thing about the absence of Bobby Portis is he's your swing man. So now it comes down to Jericho Sims has to play. And I know Bucks fans, I don't mean that in a bad way either, but I know Bucks fans are clamoring for we want more Jericho Sims and Giannis Antetokounmpo minutes together. Doc Rivers himself, it kind of told you, like, I'm only doing that if I have to. Like, I forget the exact quote, but he said, I think we've discovered it's tough to play Jericho with Giannis because of the spacing. Like, we love the defense, and he is a tenacious rebounder, great defender as well. He's always active, but we need that spacing for Giannis. So that's a tough thing to throw out there. And now with no Kyle Kuzma, we think, with no Bobby Portis, it takes away from just how creative you can be there.
It looks like it's going to be something that's going to have to be on the table for him. And in addition to just how the front court rotation looks for him against the Hawks, if there's no Kyle Kuzma, I also wonder what happens to the Dame Giannis minutes, because we've been seeing Doc rest him at the same time and leaning on the Kuz plus bench minutes. If there is no Kyle Kuzma available, what do those lineups look like? What are you still looking to keep Dame and Giannis on the bench together at the same time? Are you looking to stagger them a little bit more? I'm really curious to see what that looks like for them and who is the guy or guys who re-enter into the rotation in Kuz's place. Like if it's Andre Jackson Jr., like those lineups, they don't have the same juice to them. Like you'll get some defense for sure, but just like the playmaking that we've seen from Kuz so far and his ability to finish at the rim. So like it's going to be really interesting to see how they play this in Atlanta tomorrow, because Kuz has become a big part of this rotation, even though I've been saying like it's not a big three. It's not a big three. It's not, but he's still a big part of what this Bucks team is doing.
He's the biggest of the other guys.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned too, the pace that the Hawks play at, that's, it's going to be more of a track meet. Like that's where you really need a guy like Kyle Kuzma as well. So yeah, I would imagine it means Ryan Rollins, hey, congratulations on being converted. And now we're going to need you to play more. Andre Jackson Jr., perhaps opening the door there, because I would guess this means Taurean Prince slides back to 3 if Kyle Kuzma doesn't play. And then is it Andre Jackson Jr. from out of the rotation to back into the starting lineup, or AJ Green, or what the Bucks do there? So yeah, it's going to be an interesting grouping that the Bucks have to roll out there later on tonight against the Hawks. And, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, we talked about this on the last show in that, the schedule, the early part of March, I don't want to say it's less daunting, but suddenly it doesn't have the same kind of zip that it did before when you look at especially the Mavs and some of the injuries they're dealing with their bigs. Well, add to it, we haven't heard anything yet, but it didn't look good for Kyrie Irving that he had to be helped off the floor. He did return, but needed to be helped to shoot free throws just in case he wanted to re-enter the game. But I mean, look, if you got a Dallas Mavericks fan in your life, just give him a hug, because it is rough out there right now.
It feels like the basketball gods have just been just raining down unfavorable situations for that franchise since that Luka trade has happened. Unbelievable. The Kyrie injury, seeing him go down that way, seeing him get helped to the free throw line where I thought they were just taking him off the court. Then he stops at the free throw line, shoots his throws, can't move, literally can't move by himself afterwards. I would be extremely surprised if he suits up against the Bucks. Like, it just does not feel realistic for him to come back in 2 days after the injury that he sustained there. So to your point about this first 3 games here that we have coming up after opening up the month against the Mavericks, the Hawks tonight, Tuesday night, and then back-to-back against the Mavericks on Wednesday.
Oh, yeah.
Then they have the Magic on Saturday, followed by the Celtics, or not the Celtics, the Cavs on Sunday. So like these next 3 games, like there's never really a great time to get injured, but for Kyle Kuzma and what this Bucks team is looking like, you don't want Kuz to be injured come playoff time. So like if there has to be a break here, like with the schedule, how it's shaking out, this is a part in the schedule where, again, it's not going to be given to you, but with the other teams that you're facing and what they have going against them, you should be in pretty decent shape to come out with a victory.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll get an injury report later today for tomorrow's game against the Mavs, but Anthony Davis isn't going to play in that game. He's not going to be reevaluated until later this week. Daniel Gafford, very
Later
likely
this
not
week.
going to play. Yeah, Derek Lively, very likely not going to play. Caleb Martin's been out for a couple games with a hip strain. He didn't play, I believe, Saturday against the Bucks. I'm assuming he's still going to be out. Now you had PJ Washington added with an ankle sprain again. So they're going through it right now. And I think to just look at what happened in that game, they did lose to the Kings. They were down by 32 in that game.
Jaden
Ended up
Hardy went
losing.
down that game too.
Yeah, ended up losing by 24. So there's another one to throw into the list. No starter scored in double figures for the Mavs in that game. Kyrie Irving leaves after 9 minutes. Dwight Powell is kind of dusted off because of all the bigs that are out. He plays just 9 minutes. Their leading scorer in the starting lineup was Kyrie Irving, who scored 7 points in his 9 minutes. Kai Jones, who they just added,
Career high.
21 points, career high off the bench. So it is a mess right now in Dallas. But look, if you're the Bucks, hey, we'll take any help we can get as we start to move forward in our trek here towards the playoffs, especially when you continue to look around the Eastern Conference and you see the Detroit Pistons doing what they're doing. The Indiana Pacers were idle last night. They do play again tonight. So you're going to have to keep the pace with not one, but two teams in those Eastern Conference standings. Or are you? I mean, that's the other interesting part that started to pop up here in recent days. I do feel pretty safe in saying the Bucks will finish no lower than 6th in the Eastern Conference. But is 6 the optimal spot to finish? We'll start to take a look at that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, running a small business means you're wearing a lot of hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone, and before you know it, you're juggling customer calls day and night. As your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with just your personal phone number. That's where OpenPhone comes in. It is the #1 business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal life separate. For just $15 a month, that's the cost of a few coffees, you get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. OpenPhone works through an app on your phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you'll have a rundown of your calls and action items the second you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem. Automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. Right now, OpenPhone is offering 20% off for your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That is openphone.com/LockedOnNBA for 20% off for your first 6 months. openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. Once again, openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, Camille, we mentioned a few times it's going to be incredibly challenging to catch the New York Knicks, who have 22 games left to the Knicks. You have 23, 22 after tonight, but you're 5 back in the loss column. You don't have the tiebreaker. So you're essentially 6 back in the Knicks that you would have to outplay them by, where you each have 22 to 23 games left. That's a monumental collapse by the New York Knicks. Or it's the Bucks going on something like, hey, in those final 23 games, the Bucks finished the season 18-5 or 19-4. Like, that's what it's going to take. So it's not impossible. It is just very unlikely. Now, you can say the same and apply that same logic to those play-in tournament teams. And, you and I are old enough to remember way back when in November, when several Bucks fans were fretting over, is this team going to be a play-in tournament team? Yes. Even at points in January. But looking at that standings, or those standings, you're 6 games up in the loss column on the Miami Heat, who right now are the 7th seed, and you have the tiebreaker. So it's an even taller mountain for the Heat to climb against you than it is you against the New York Knicks. And Miami's 2 games in front of every team behind them in the play-in tournament. So I do think we can slam the door shut and lock it on the potential of the Bucks being a play-in tournament team. And that brings us to the next part of this. And look, the ultimate caveat here is if the Bucks aren't healthy, none of this matters, right?
Correct.
We've seen the last few years the importance of have your guys healthy and we'll go from there. But I don't know, like, I know it's still early with 23 games yet to play, but as you look at this and we continue to see what the Cleveland Cavaliers are doing and how much they are frankly being slept on and just kind of diminished because they've never done it before. It's, the same logic you could apply to the Bucks going into 2021 of, well, it's a team that has largely been together, but they disappointed in the playoffs. We're saying the same thing about the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they're running roughshod through the league right now on a 10-game win streak. They're 50-10 on the season. They were down 20 plus to the Celtics on the road on Friday night. They came back to win that game. The more you see this Cavs team, the more I don't think it's even close that they should not be the favorite in the Eastern Conference. That's a very bad way of wording it. The more I think they're far and away the favorite in the Eastern Conference, or should be.
I mean, they've been hooping like the favorites.
And if you're the 4 seed or if you're in that 4-5 line, that's your second round opponent if you get through the first round. And look, there's no easy path. We've talked about that year after year after year. But I got to tell you, I am not that scared of the New York Knicks, despite being 0-2 against the Knicks and the margin of defeat that you suffered against them. I think we've started to see more with this Knicks team. I think this is frankly a much different Bucks team with those personnel changes that we've talked about. And look, the question always exists with the Knicks of, are their guys going to break down because of their lack of depth and how much Tom Thibodeau rides their starters in the regular season? In this scenario, I mean, you're kissing goodbye home court advantage in any series if you're the 6th seed, basically. And that's the big thing to keep in mind. It also means, again, to the no easy path discussion, you're probably playing the Boston Celtics in the second round, the reigning NBA champions. But is it crazy to suggest less than a year after the Celtics win the championship saying, is that actually your better path to catch the Celtics in the second round than the Cleveland Cavaliers?
And that's, who would have thought that this would be the conversation or the question that has like legit moments where we have to think through it of like, is it Cleveland or Boston that you would rather face in the playoffs here because of the way that the Cavaliers have been running through the league? Like, they've been running through the league at a pace that we saw the Celtics doing last year, where they were just far and away.
That we saw the Bucks do before COVID happened in 2020.
Right, like just far and away the best team in the league based on the numbers and just how they're hooping, the wins they've been able to get. And for me, I thinking about the earlier games against the Cavaliers this season, the Bucks played them pretty tough outside of the last time we saw the Cavaliers coming out of the NBA Cup game, final game. But the other times, like, the games were competitive. They were close. I think with the Cavs utilizing their 2 big lineup with Allen and Mobley, like, they match up well with the Bucks, giving the Bucks like to throw out Giannis and Brook. You now have Jericho Sims as well as another big in your rotation to throw out. If you want to try to do things a little bit differently, you can use Kyle Kuzma as a big as well. So, like, thinking of a size matchup, like, that'd be a pretty big series. And the Cavs have been good. I have a healthy level of respect for the Cavaliers. And this is not me saying, like, yeah, the Bucks can beat anybody. Like, it's just the fact, again, if the Bucks are healthy, they're going to have the best player in the series with Giannis. And I think that swings so much of it. And it's hard for me at times to think like, oh, second round Bucks, because we haven't seen them get out the first round for the last couple of years. So, like, for me, it's like, first things first, finish top 4 in the East, get that home court advantage if you can get it, and get out of the first round. Whoever is waiting for you after the first round is going to be a tough task. It's going to be Knicks, Celtics, Cavaliers, however that happens to shake out based on where the Bucks finish, like, their second round matchup is going to be tough. And I go into any of those matchups, like, if they're healthy, I think they got a shot at it. Now, I'm not saying they're going to be the favorites, but, like, I think it's going to be competitive, and you can't sleep on the Bucks in those series.
I mean, and their first round matchup's going to be tough too. I think, to the same point, not to the same extreme, but, like, I do think a lot of people are kind of diminishing the Indiana Pacers too, just because it's easy to write off last year as well. They got lucky with injuries that the Bucks had, and one after another, the injuries the Knicks suffered in that second round series, and then finally came up short against the Celtics. But you go back to last year, Joe Mazzulla said that was our toughest challenge in the playoffs, and it does seem like they're kind of right back to that level now. And they have a nice mix of pieces too, with some of the guys that they've really started to expand their roles for this season. Aaron Nesmith and Andrew Nembhard and what they've done for this group. Oh, by the way, Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam. So that's going to be a challenge as well. Yeah, I mean, it's too early to have the conversation. It was just something that stood out to me as you heard more and more people talking about that 4 through 6 in the Eastern Conference, and really just some of the matchups that we have. I think the last thing I would ask is, what is the more to the casual basketball fan, obviously not to us, what's the better seeding in terms of the playoff matchups that you would get in the first round? If you had Bucks, Knicks, and Pacers, Pistons, or if you had Knicks, Pacers, and Bucks, Pistons, or if you had Pistons, Knicks, and Bucks, Pacers?
I think that if you can run back Knicks Pacers, because they have a little playoff history now after last year, that's probably going to be the more appealing matchup of any of the ones that we just mentioned. And then for the Bucks, I think there's something to that Pistons Bucks matchup, which to some people, they might be like, no one wants to see Milwaukee and Detroit. But if you remember the last time the Pistons were even in the playoffs, they got smacked by the Bucks. They're in the same division. Like, it's a Midwest, it's a close proximity type of series. And Detroit hasn't been to the playoffs since then, which was 18-19, I believe that season was. So
it was the first time the Bucks had gotten out of the first round in 20 years, right?
So it's going to be a hot series because the city of Detroit, whoever the Pistons end up playing in the playoffs, that city is going to be hot during those games. And that home court situation, whenever the Pistons are at home, is going to be fun. And if it's Milwaukee, Detroit, proximity, you might see a lot of Pistons fans trying to get to Milwaukee, might see some Bucks fans trying to get to Detroit. I think that'd be a really fun one. And it would not be easy either for the Bucks. The Pistons are going to make them work for it.
Yeah. I look, the big thing for the Bucks, we talked about it in the last show too. They're 13-16 on the road. That's the number. That and fourth quarter offense. Those are the things we have to start to see change for this group. You got a chance to do it tonight as you head to Atlanta to take on the Hawks. We think the Bucks are going to be shorthanded. We know the Hawks are going to be on night 2 of a back-to-back. So we'll see how that goes for a Hawks team that's going to look to push the pace in that game. And by the way, we mentioned that the Bucks upgraded Ryan Rollins. We didn't mention they did use the deadline to fill out their final two-way spot. Jamari Booyah, is it? To their final two-way deal is the guy that takes that spot. So March 4th was the deadline to add a two-way player for the remainder of the season, and the Bucks have done that as he played 14 NBA games the last 2 seasons and was playing with the Austin Spurs in the G League this season. So we'll start to learn more about the 2 new pieces to the Bucks roster, not only he, but as we mentioned, Pete Nance, we've yet to see because of that ankle injury as well. That'll do it for today's show. We got the game recap coming up for you tomorrow, as hopefully we're recapping a Bucks win in Atlanta against the Hawks, and then right back at it with another back-to-back against, we think, the banged-up Dallas Mavericks. So for Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.